in the economy that turns into a recession. People blame it on greed in the preceding period. But greed is actually a sort of social constant. People were just as greedy in the 70s as they were in the 80s, just as greedy in the 90s as they were in the 80s. Greed doesn't fluctuate like that. There's no reason why it should. What fluctuates are government policies. And government policies are what drive the business cycle, for example. Now, that doesn't mean that people never make mistakes. And certainly, there are people who have expressed plenty of greed in financial markets or in housing markets in the past 10 years. And so they've certainly played a role in the housing boom and in the stock market boom that we saw before these booms turned to bust. But when we go a step back behind their actions and say, how was it possible for them to undertake the actions they undertook? What did the government do to create incentives for them to take those actions? Where did the money come from? When we start asking those questions, we see that it's not simply greedy individuals that cause these seemingly irrational bubbles, but that they all have identifiable causes in government policy. And we need to take that into account. It's not to say that people make no mistakes. It's not to say that markets are perfect, because markets consist of human beings taking actions in cooperation with one another. So of course they're going to make mistakes. But mistakes are one thing, but the kind of mistakes that give rise to system-wide booms, system-wide economic busts, financial debacles across a wide range, these things invariably have their roots in perverse government policies. Otherwise, the mistakes would be much more randomly distributed over time and space.
Macomb, Georgia. You're on with Robert Higgs.
Hi, Macon, Georgia. We've just had one of the greatest felonies in the history of the world, either one or two ways. A lot of people around the world conspired to get over on the banks and defraud them and put down incomes that weren't right. And all the banks conspired to be so stupid as to accept it without, you know, any checks and balances. And or they themselves somehow got this over on the people, like some of the people have testified to, that the bank said, I'm going to put this down here, don't worry about it. And our government was kind of aware of all this if you watch the testimony, and the Swiss bank was fined $1 billion for the tax evasion for the companies from America, and yet we just gave them $1 billion. AIG just gave them $1 billion from the bailout, and that came out in the testimony. We have got an organized gang running our government, and they're stealing from us, and you're acting like people getting a little help is some big, bad thing, but yet we pay for trade adjustment wages and Medicare and food stamps and housing for all the illegal aliens to come over just so that the companies don't pay them $5 an hour, because, woo, that would really hurt them. And, you know, when they can go pay 10 cents a day for the Chinese to work.
All right, caller, we got a lot there on the plate. Dr. Higgs.
I think we've got several issues involved in your question. First of all, the behavior of the banks and of many of the people who borrowed from the banks for mortgages between 2002 and 2006 or 7 is inexcusable. These banks behaved very irresponsibly. They did not do what's called due diligence in making these transactions. Otherwise, they would never have lent money to people who didn't have a fixed address or a documentable income. So there's no excuse for what these banks did. And there is no excuse for bailing them out when they got in trouble as a result. The financial institutions that made these foolish loans and now find themselves insolvent should be allowed to go bankrupt. That would be not only what is productive for the economy, because any good assets they have left would then come into the hands of other people. We would hope more responsible, better managers than the ones that got the firms into the trouble in the first place. As your question suggested, many of the people who borrowed money for housing were also irresponsible. No one twisted their arm, as it were, to sign up for mortgages they had no good prospect of being able to repay, and yet they relied on the foolish idea that they would forever be able to make money from rising housing values. Anybody who's looked into the matter at all knows that real estate rises and falls. It goes through regular cycles historically. So the idea that it was always going to rise and never fall again verged on idiotic. And it was not simply an assumption made by many borrowers, but also an assumption made by people lending money and people who ought to have known much better than that. But the idea that we are now bailing out these big institutions by basically stealing from the taxpayers to do it is wrong. I denounce those actions. I don't defend them in any way. And it doesn't mean that the people who are taking handouts at the bottom of the economic pyramid are necessarily to be praised either. People should not get what they do not deserve. And people should not get anything by taking it away by force from other people. This is simply stealing. And if it's filtered through the government, it doesn't change the nature of it. It's still stealing with government as a middleman. So I'm not holding a brief for big financial firms, nor am I holding a brief for people who've come to rely on government assistance at the lower reaches of the income spectrum. All of these things are regrettable. It would have been much better for everyone had they never happened. They have happened, and now we find ourselves in such a messy situation that it's well nigh impossible to foresee ever getting free of these kinds of government coercion and returning to a much more peaceful, voluntary arrangement.
Two of your books, Crisis and Leviathan, and Against Leviathan. Who and what is Leviathan?
Well, Leviathan is a term often used to refer to a very big, powerful government, and it goes back to Thomas Hobbes' book called Leviathan from 1650. Hobbes is one of the greatest political philosophers of all time, and people who know anything about his ideas will recall that for Hobbes, Leviathan was a good thing. We need to remember that Hobbes was very much influenced by living at a time of chaos and violence during the English political struggles and warfare in the mid-17th century. And apparently it made him so despondent of the possibility of restoring peace and order that he developed a body of thought in which he said, if we only surrender all our rights to the sovereign in exchange for his keeping the peace, then it'll be a good trade. I myself think it was a bad trade, and once we surrender all our rights to the sovereign, we've got ourselves in a real fix then.
In Against Leviathan, you have some scenarios for creating greater economic equality. Just want to read these to our audience and have you explain this a little bit. Again, scenarios for creating greater economic equality. Number one, the death rate increases abruptly for persons older than 35. Number two, young women find themselves unable to bear children. Number three, a new law requires housewives to enter into paid employment. 4, a new law requires every worker to switch occupations at least once a year. 5, poor robbers increase their plunder on rich victims. 6, people develop an aversion to education and training. And 7, the work week is legally fixed at 20 hours and overtime work is outlawed.
Those are in the nature of reductio ad absurdum to show that the reason some people have much higher incomes than other people has a great deal to do with